Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast here on thelittleshaman.com, brought to you by Transrelational Healing, shamanspiritcenter.com, and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that many people find when dealing with pathologically narcissistic personalities, and that is these situations bring out the worst in people. It's bad enough to be dealing with someone who is bringing what seems to be the very worst of themselves to every interaction. So much of the time, they are angry, rude, unpleasant, they don't listen, they're selfish, they have no space for the perspectives of other people. They're defensive, suspicious, paranoid, negative, just everything that makes a person difficult to deal with in any way. It's even worse when you find that you are also starting to show up as your worst self in these interactions too. Suddenly, you are always angry and rude and unpleasant and suspicious and negative. Suddenly, you are chronically not listening and you're interrupting and you're yelling or you're giving the silent treatment or you're making passive aggressive comments. Suddenly, it's you who's overwhelmed emotionally and becoming hysterical. But this is all extremely common in situations where people are dealing with narcissists. And it adds insult to injury in a lot of cases because people are not only being mistreated by somebody, they feel badly about their own behavior on top of that. They often feel guilty for things that they've said or done, or maybe they feel embarrassed. It's hard to recover from these situations when you not only have to process what was done to you, but also find a way to accept what you've done. And to be clear, this isn't just about reciprocating an abuser's mean or cruel behavior, even though it often is. This is also about losing control of yourself emotionally and acting out somehow, tolerating behavior that you shouldn't have tolerated, going back into the relationship when you knew you should not do that, not standing up for yourself, and many other things. People can find it very difficult to forgive themselves for their own choices when the situation or relationship is over. It's important to remember, though, that when we are in these situations or these relationships, we're not in a safe or a healthy situation. So it might be very difficult to understand what you were thinking or feeling during that time, or to try to understand why you did something or why maybe you didn't do it. That's okay. You were not yourself. And because of that, some of it's not going to make any sense to you now. Maybe it didn't even make sense to you then. Nobody can be in such a crazy situation and behave perfectly normally or do everything right or make all the perfect decisions. These relationships bring out the absolute worst in everybody, and nobody seems to be able to escape that. Everybody does things in these relationships that they don't understand or that they wish they didn't do. And of course they do. The situation is crazy. There's no way to respond, quote unquote, correctly to crazy. We all just do the best we can with what we have and what we know at the time, and we have to learn to be okay with that. It's important to remember, too, that this sort of perfect victim stereotype is a myth. Most people do not do everything right or perfectly in situations where they're being mistreated, and even when they're not. Being human is messy. It involves complex emotions and making decisions with limited or incorrect information. There is a representation of victims in our culture that is, in many respects, false and even harmful. Victims are often presented by the media, for example, in a way that depicts them as flawless and innocent and pure. While certainly nobody deserves to be mistreated or killed, almost no adult fits that bill. Almost no adult is flawless and innocent and pure. Most people have done things in their lives that the rest of us would consider to be wrong. Most people have flaws. Most people will react with temper if you provoke them enough. Most people will engage in what we might call bad behavior in a bad situation. That is completely normal. But many people are stuck in this perfect victim myth, and they feel that this somehow means that they deserve what happened to them or that they're not really a victim, because victims only look or act a certain way. They only respond with fear and sadness and are totally passive, and anybody who doesn't react that way is not a victim. This narrative creates a lot of shame and guilt where there doesn't need to be any, because that's totally false. The reality is, many victims are angry. Many victims are frustrated. Many victims want justice. Many victims want revenge. Many victims fight back, including physically. Some studies have found that in the general population, the reciprocity rate for domestic violence is close to 50%, for example. Does that mean that the people who hit their abusers back are not victims? No, it does not. It means that they are people who were pushed to their breaking point and they fought back. Almost everybody will do that eventually. To expect people to never do that is absurd and unrealistic. In the end, just about everybody will. Let go of the idea that unless you did everything right and perfectly, that this somehow dismisses or justifies what happened to you. It doesn't. You're a human being in a bad situation, and if you haven't always done the thing that was the best or right or the most perfect, who has? You don't need to be perfectly innocent and perfectly flawless and perfectly pure to deserve respect and decency. Nobody does. You have to believe that. And until you do, you're always going to feel that mistreatment can be justified somehow. For example, people commonly say things to narcissists like, well, you're treating me this way when I didn't do anything wrong. This sounds fine, and it's actually very common, but the reality is that narrative reinforces the idea that mistreating somebody is only wrong if they're perfect. It perpetuates the idea and is basically saying if you had done something wrong, then being mistreated is perfectly fine and that's okay. That's not true. Abuse and mistreatment is never okay, regardless of the circumstances. If there are circumstances where abuse and mistreatment are okay, then there's really no such thing as abuse and mistreatment, because a person can always find something that somebody did to use as a justification for how what they're doing is okay, which is exactly what we see in relationships with narcissists, by the way. They're never doing anything wrong in their opinion because it's always justified. The other person or the other people always deserve it. The truth is, people are responsible for their own actions. Whether they think the other person deserved it or not is irrelevant. We do what we do, and that's a choice. The key is to remember that everybody deserves to be treated with basic decency and respect, no matter what. And if somebody doesn't agree with that, that's a reflection of them and a choice that they are making. You're not obligated to deal with that just because somebody thinks you deserve it for some reason. Letting go of the idea that there is ever some kind of validity to this narrative helps enormously with that. When you can look at somebody and say, and truly believe, it doesn't matter what I did or what you think I deserve. The way you are treating me is not okay. That really helps to put these things into perspective. Because we are not children, and adults are not entitled to punish other adults in this way, which is what it is. It's a punishment. And they're not entitled to decide and just dole out what they think other people deserve in this way. Letting go of the idea that they are somehow entitled to do these things helps concretize a lot of what is wrong in these relationships. Once you let go of that idea, you generally come to see that much of the behavior of narcissists is way out of line. On a side note, let go of attaching importance to things people say who were not there and who don't understand also. People love to say, well, I would have done this and I would do that and this is where I think. Well, good for you. You weren't there, you aren't me, and you clearly do not understand where I personally was at the time. So leave that where it belongs, because what other people say they would do in hypothetical situations they were not in, or in situations they were in when they were not you, doesn't apply to you or anything that you do, especially in situations like this. That's the thing about these relationships, and it doesn't get anywhere near the amount of attention that it should. In so many of these situations, you're just not yourself. That's why people look back and they're like, what even was I doing? We can talk about trauma bonding and addiction and trauma, and these things definitely play a role in the situation, but the reality is that you're not yourself in these relationships. They make you into somebody you're not in some ways. They disconnect you from who you truly are. Part of this is the ego trauma, the constantly being told that you are and treated as if you are someone other than who you actually are. Part of this is the endless pressure to perform perfectly, never make any mistakes, never say anything wrong, never do anything wrong. Part of it is the constant mistreatment and being told that you're not good enough. Part of it is the addiction. Part of it is the trauma bond. Part of it is the emotional dysregulation that people, quote unquote, catch from narcissists like a bad cold from all the drama and constant high stakes situations that this person creates. Part of it is the defensiveness and the fear. Part of it is the environment and the continued erosion of moral and ethical standards that comes from constantly being around a person who doesn't have any. There are a lot of factors here, but one of the biggest is that you're living in a cartoon, a fairy tale complete with villains and heroes and just the whole 9 yards. Some child's fever dream. None of this is real. None of it even seems real in many respects. You're shoved into a role that you were not aware of and that you don't want to play, and you spend all of your time trying to define the reality of yourself in opposition to this very rigid role. Everything becomes polarized, black and white, good and bad, right or wrong, right or left, up and down. There is no gray here. There's no nuance. You can't be just a regular person who makes mistakes and misspeaks and jokes around and is incorrect sometimes and does things imperfectly and has flaws. A person with good and bad qualities who's good at some things and not at others, whatever else. No. In these relationships, every single thing you do defines the totality of your character forever. The kicker of all of this, as if that wasn't bad enough, everything you do is viewed through the most negative lens possible. Surprise, it's totally unfair. There's not only no way to not do something considered horribly wrong, but once you do that, there's no way to redeem yourself at all. Even worse, a narcissist will often tell you over and over again that you are doing that to them. The fact that you constantly forgive them and let everything go in the hopes of keeping the peace and the relationship intact means nothing at all. Totally pointless. The reality is, underneath of all of the other things, these relationships knock you crazy. They knock you stupid. With all of the love bombing and the devaluing and the emotional roller coaster rides and the tornadoes that blow up literally out of nowhere, and the fact that the whole thing is an illusion, and so is the other person, and so are you in the context of who you are seen as in the relationship, your brain stops working correctly. And of course it does. How could it work correctly in the midst of all of that? It's impossible. Can't be done. It's easy to judge our past behavior with current knowledge and present eyes. Hindsight's always 20/20, right? But this is also really, really unfair. Not only do you very likely have information now that you did not have then, you're out of the fever dream now. You're out of the cartoon. Things look very, very different outside of that reality. So beating yourself up for things that you did that you can't even explain or understand is not all that helpful or fair. It's kind of like trying to understand something you did while you were drunk. It's never going to make sense. You were not in your right mind and you're under the influence of something that clouded your thinking, screwed up your perception, and affected your reasoning. The key then is not to try to understand what you were thinking while you were drunk. In a way, that doesn't even really matter. The key is to stop drinking if it's causing a problem. Just like being drunk, being in a relationship with a narcissist does not absolve us of responsibility for our behavior or our choices, but it can certainly explain some of them. Dealing with this kind of person is like being in a parallel universe where you are some kind of different you who does and says and thinks things that the real you would never do. It brings out the absolute worst in so many people, all of their negative, harmful, awful traits and behavior. Why? Because the whole thing is negative, harmful, and awful. And if you're in that environment long enough, the negative qualities that you have, because you do have some negative qualities, everybody does, those are going to come out. Other things might be things that you would never do in any normal circumstance, but you are doing them in this one because it's totally horrible and completely unbearable. We tend to become like our environment as well. So on top of all of our reactions to the rotten, unfair way we're being treated, when you're living in a situation where abuse and mistreatment and rudeness and unpleasantness and disrespect and degradation are normal, where these things are common, eventually that will start rubbing off on you. No matter what kind of person someone genuinely is inside, if they are insulted enough, most people will eventually insult back, for example. Most people will hit back. Most people will manipulate or rage or whatever back. It may only be once. It might take a long time. It might even take years. But most people will eventually respond in kind. And why wouldn't they? There's no taboo on it in this situation. It's the norm. Once you do it once, it's that much easier to do it again and again and again until people are standing there watching themselves thinking, what am I doing? This isn't me. This is one of the reasons no contact is so important. The amount of positive impact or influence that you can have on a pathologically narcissistic personality is nothing compared to the negative impact and influence that they're going to have on you. It's not worth it. For all the good that it will do, you might as well just pour your love, energy, money, compassion, whatever else, just out onto the ground and walk away from it. It's a total waste. Better that you keep these things for yourself. You will actually use them. I speak with people all over the world who have been impacted by narcissistic abuse in the context of all kinds of different relationships: family, marital, work-related, cohabitating, neighbors, friends, polyam, everything you could imagine. Every type of relationship, just about every situation you can think of. Many of them were in these entanglements for years. The most common reason people give for finally deciding to exit the relationship or the situation or whatever it is permanently, or what they want help with and why they're reaching out, is not because they're afraid, even though some of them are. It's not because they're exhausted, even though most of them are. It's because they don't like who they are becoming. They don't like how they're becoming chronically mean or nasty or suspicious or withdrawn or depressed or sad or overreactive or afraid or angry or negative or ill or anxious or exhausted or closed off or whatever other unpleasant, uncomfortable thing that's not who they really are. They feel that being around the narcissist and dealing with the narcissist is making them the same as the narcissist. Not only is that repulsive and even frightening for most people in these situations, but it's like wearing a skin that isn't yours, and most people can only do that for so long. Even people who are not exiting the situation for whatever reason are so often reaching out because they want help reconnecting with who they really are as a person. They don't like who they're becoming. Perhaps more than any other relationship, narcissists hold a mirror up to us of who we really are. They often do that by showing us who we're not, to the point that we start loving ourselves almost in self-defense. We can see through their hysterical projections to who we really are, and we realize, hey, I'm not so bad. Certainly I deserve better than what this person is prepared to ever give me. In their creepy funhouse mirrors, we also see who we don't want to be and who we very well may become if we don't get out of the situation. For many people, that's the realization that gets them moving in a different direction. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via Messenger, through Zoom and Skype worldwide. So if you are interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, seminars, clinics, and more. So if you are interested in seeing what we're running this month, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I have several books out for publication. So if you are interested in picking up a copy today, you can do that on Amazon, and you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. And if you are interested in joining our support group with access to exclusive content, weekly support meetings, and more, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that as well. You have been listening to the Meditations and More podcast here on thelittleshaman.com, brought to you by Transrelational Healing, shamanspiritcenter.com, and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day.
If you've been struggling through dealing with or recovering from an unhealthy relationship with a narcissist or other toxic personality, the Little Shaman has a catalog of over 500 YouTube videos designed to support your journey from discovery to recovery. You can also find additional resources on the Little Shaman website, including tools, courses, workshops, a support group with weekly meetings, and one-on-one appointments with the Little Shaman that are open to clients worldwide. There's even an AI chatbot built and trained exclusively by the Little Shaman using her work that can answer questions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For more information, visit littleshaman.org. You can listen to The Little Shaman wherever you find your favorite podcasts.